Well, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, let me express my appreciation to the conference organisers for giving myself and my wife the opportunity to participate in this conference and listen to the discussions. This morning I heard many themes that were familiar about scientific excellence and student access, about relations between research universities and colleges, about government interference, and so on. These are very familiar. I want to very briefly review the Australian experience of the last half century, and it's a story that's somewhat different to many other countries. What will be of great interest is that we, 20 years ago, had a very similar situation with traditional research universities and a separate college of advanced education sector, degree-granting institutions. In 1987, the government, the federal government of our day, unexpectedly decided, as part of a whole package of reforms, to abolish the distinction between those sectors. And so 19 universities plus 45 colleges over a couple of years turned into 36 universities in a single sector. I saw in some of the documentation reference to a couple of Australian colleagues who were quoted back in 1991 that this was a terrible disaster. Well, a lot of traditional university academics at that time thought it was a disaster. They thought the world was falling in. My perspective is different. I think overall this has worked very well. Today we have a very lively higher education system. It's largely 37 public universities with a few little bits and pieces. The average size of universities are between 20 and 25,000 students. And part of the package at the time was increased government research funding, increased funding for teaching, and effectively more institutional autonomy. Let me account the story very quickly. Obviously, perhaps I should go to this one. So I want to review the experience of Australia since 1945. Since Australia is a long way away, let me just give you a few essential facts. It's a population of about 20 million, so something like 3 times the size of Israel, if I've got the figures right. Located in Southeast Asia, it started as apart from the indigenous people, as an Anglo population of immigrants, but with very substantial post-Second World War migration. 25% of our population are born outside Australia. It's a dry continent, absence of high mountains, population are largely concentrated in major cities. We have a federal political system similar to the United States or Canada, with education being a state rather than a national responsibility, and so that places some problems. We talk about tertiary education rather than higher education to refer to the whole post-school education operation. Higher education consists essentially of universities and similar institutions, about 930,000 students in the 37 universities, but we've got a growing private sector as well. And then we have the vocational education training sector, made up of about 1.2 million students, most of who study part-time. This slide very briefly summarises a transition in about 50 years. Our population has gone from 7 million to 20 million. In 1945 we had 8 universities with about 16,000 students, just a handful of students, a single university today, plus some other students. Today, with 37 public universities, 390,000 students in the public sector. A participation rate in university type probably about 3.1%. Today, 59%. Our experience in many ways has mirrored that of other countries, many other similar features. But it's probably sensible for me to concentrate particularly on those features that are distinctive. What we've done differently. We created a binary system in the mid-60s made up of universities and colleges. Many of the colleges were existing institutions, but they were drawn together in a single sector. The aim was to offer a different form and a cheaper form of higher education. But we abandoned this sector in 1987 and put universities and colleges together. So we're one of the few countries, the UK is another, that's done that. We've done different things with tuition fees. We abolished tuition fees in 1973, and then in 1990 reintroduced tuition fees. It was done by a Labor government, and another Labor government reintroduced tuition fees. But we did it with a very clever system. It's really a graduate tax, a graduate loan system. Students incur a liability when they study, but they only have to pay for it through the taxation system once their income gets up to the average for the total community. It's proved to be a very successful system. We've also moved from state-supported system of higher education to national supported, financially supported the Commonwealth Government, to what we refer to as now Commonwealth subsidised rather than fully supported. Our national government now pays considerably less than 50% of the operating expenses of our universities. We also created a separate vocational education and training sector. Wait a minute, we've gone a little bit too far. Distinctive features, here we are. Distance education has played a major role in our expansion since 1955, and we have about 15% of students in distance education. One interesting organisational feature that has come in the last decade, and we didn't really expect, although we have 37 public universities, we have 150 university campuses and another probably 100 study centres. So the typical Australian university today is a multi-site operation but run on a unitary basis. It's only an accident of geography that they're not all on the one campus. We don't have campus heads. Another distinctive feature is the role of international students. In the last decade, Australia has marketed very strongly for the international students. I think today it's probably about 220 or 230,000 fee-paying international students, and that constitutes about 22% of our total enrolments. So it's a very big part of the total operation. Overall, it's been very positive. The response from these students from largely Asian countries, they go back with very positive attitudes about their experience, and it certainly has had a big impact on what happens on campuses and the attitudes and the outlooks of young Australians. Let me just very briefly go through the various stages of this system. 1945, after the Second World War, an impoverished state government-owned systems. Relatively few students. In each of the 6 states there was one university, and it got an annual grant from the government. In the next 20 years we moved very quickly. Rapid expansion, ex-service people coming back with a scholarship scheme, and our federal government was attracted to help universities in a time of great need. They helped on an ad hoc basis first. They set up a committee of inquiry in 1956, And at that time we were very much influenced by other people's ideas. And so who should we get to chair the Committee of Inquiry? The chairman of the British University Grants Committee. And that led to a system where our federal government came to help support the universities on a regular basis of matching grants between federal and state. We set up a university grants type commission to plan and to organise, and we went to a triennial system of funding. In the mid-60s, the government took the big decision to develop this advanced education, this college sector. Growth was at a much more rapid rate than expected, and the original idea was that these colleges would offer sub-degree, a status thing, sub-degree courses, largely vocational. They were to be equal in status but different to universities. And also part of the thinking at the time, they were going to cater for students with different characteristics, more vocationally minded characteristics. And that became a big issue of debate. But this college sector proved very successful. Large numbers of students were enrolled. Many of the colleges were single-purpose teachers' colleges, agricultural colleges, and the state and the federal government went to great effort to try to consolidate these into comprehensive colleges. And the colleges weren't very compliant. They weren't very agreeable with this idea of being combined into comprehensive institutions. There was an upward drift in qualifications as university PhDs were appointed, and by the time the system ended, 72% of the students were enrolled in bachelor's degrees and postgraduate degrees. And some of the colleges had got into not only research master's degrees, but in PhDs. 1987, we had the famous reforms led by an energetic young Minister for Employment, Education and Training, John Dawkins. The major motivation was economic reform. Until the mid-1980s, Australia depended largely for export income on farm products and minerals. And in the mid-1980s, a number of those went wrong at the same time. And this was a great shake to the country, and it made people realise that a rethinking of economic strategy was necessary. So the new strategy was, what we do is to try to develop various service industries, specialised manufacturing, and lower tariffs. Our secondary industry had been behind tariff walls, essentially to create employment. So these higher education reforms were driven by this larger economic reform. We abolished the binary divide. We amalgamated, combined institutions. So we went from about 65 back to 36 institutions. We introduced the HEX scheme, and there was additional funding came from the government, and there was additional funding for research. It was highly controversial, and it was very cleverly managed by a most capable minister. What he did with the amalgamations is not to tell the institutions who had to merge, but he said, look, we're starting a new system, and institutions have to apply to join, and if you join, you'll get federal funding. If you don't join, well, you'll have to look after your own funding, do without money. You have to have 2,000 full-time students to join, 5,000 if you want some research, 8,000 if you want to be comprehensive in research. And so in no time, the whole sector institutions were talking to one another. And the big universities, the research-intensive universities got involved. And their game was to try to attract as many colleges as possible, because they believed in the future size was to be important. And so of all the big 8, I think 6 of them took on about 3 or 4 colleges each. So this ended the college sector 2/3 of the colleges were absorbed by existing universities. About 4 or 5 in the end became autonomous universities, and then in the other cases, state governments combined 2, 3 or 4 colleges to create new universities. It was a highly controversial thing. There were a lot of sceptics. There was a lot of worry in the traditional universities. The vice-chancellors, though, on balance supported the move, because what they were promised was a greater power for vice-chancellors and university councils, greater autonomy and more funding. And many vice-chancellors played quite clever games, although not, strictly above the board, and that is that they opposed Mr Dawkins for all they were worth publicly, while internally they busily implemented the Dawkins package. The last... Can't get this to move. Seems to be locked. Let me go on quickly. Yes, the last one. Since 1996, we've had continuation of those policies, but with a Conservative government, that's even more strongly committed than the Hawke Labor government to market-oriented and commercial applications. New public sector management has been very popular within our government departments at federal and state level, and this has been applied to universities. One major calamity, really, of the last 8 years has been a fall in public funding per student unit. And so our staff-student ratios have gone from 1 to 12 back in 1990 to 1 to 22. It's a complicated story, as it usually is with relations with government. Essentially what happened in the mid-90s, we went to enterprise bargaining to fix salaries. And so the government said, from now on, we're not going to give you increased funding to meet salary increases. You're fixing them yourselves. We'll fund for cost of living, inflation. But universities have given salary increases much more than the cost of inflation. And so the government's position is, well, look, you're taking the responsibility. If you'd been wiser, given less in salary increases, you'd live within your budget, or if you'd got cost efficiencies and reduced costs. And so this continues to be a standoff from the government. It was something started by the Labor government and has been continued by the current government. So overall, we've had a checkered pattern in the last 50 years. We've increased participation very substantially. My perspective in the end of the college system is overall for us it has worked very well. I'm not advocating it as a solution for other countries. Many of our academics, many professors thought that it was going to be a disaster, but it has worked very well. But there are certain things that we've learnt along the way, and that is, if you combine universities and colleges into a single integrated sector, it pays to have separate funding streams for teaching and research. Let teaching be funded at the same level, engineering, whether it's a former college or a former university, but the money to pay academic time for research and to pay for infrastructure, let it be allocated competitively according to the strengths of the universities and the universities' research record. Our system has become much more entrepreneurial as a result of international students and the decreasing government funding. In fact, one of the major concerns of our state governments is with the entrepreneurial activities of universities. Not that they're opposed to it, but they're very much into risk management, because some of the things that our universities, without asking the government, have taken on are very big enterprises. RMIT University has established the first private international university in Ho Chi Minh City. The University of New South Wales has been given approval by the University of Singapore to develop a new private university in Singapore. Monash University has got separate campuses in Malaysia and in Johannesburg. It's a very entrepreneurial environment, and so understandably there's concern by state governments. What happens if one of these universities goes bankrupt for $1 billion? So that's my overall story, that the experiment with colleges, I think, worked very well. I think it was worth setting up the colleges in terms of giving much greater diversity in the system, bringing new disciplines into higher education, new approaches. But within this new system, much of that diversity has been maintained. Thank you.